If you're a fan of old school bodybuilding, then make sure to check out Sups the Movie. Filmmaker Alex Ardenti explores the $40 billion sports supplement industry, delving into the origins, evolution, and current state of supplements used by millions of fitness enthusiasts worldwide, available at Amazon and Vimeo. Hi everybody, Golden Era Bookham here, and today I will be showcasing an interview with Kashi Azad from Persian Yoga, which is based in Sydney, Australia. I first came into contact with Kashi in Sydney when I used to live there years ago, and I met Kashi during a yoga festival in Sydney during the late 2000s, I believe, or early 2010s, and I was immediately impressed with the strength of Kashi and the applicability of his art. Called Pahlavani, the practice stems from millennia from Iran and is recognized by UNESCO as the world's oldest form of physical culture. Here is Kashi from Persian Yoga in Sydney. Great. It's on. All right. Hi, Kashi. How are you?
Oh, hi. Nice to see you.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to finally connect. I've been looking at the history of, I've been looking at the history of physical culture. And as you probably understand better than me, physical culture goes back millennia. And when I've been talking to the people in Texas, the University of Texas, the Stark Center, we were talking about the earliest forms of physical culture. And a lot of the discussion was based around, I guess, the ancient Greeks, the ancient Romans, and their gladiator-style training. For example, the dumbbell goes all the way back to the Greeks, where it was called a halteres, right? And then you've got, in Asia, the Indians, in northern Africa, the Egyptians, with their style of physical culture, and of course China as well. But one of the things I remember was Persian yoga, being from Australia, and having met you so many years ago in one of the yoga, the yoga forums and shows that they had in Sydney. I think you did an exhibition there, and I was so impressed. So I talked to the Stark Center about you, and they never heard of Persian yoga before. And to be honest, there's not many people around the world that know about it. And I'm intrigued because I've seen many of your posts on Instagram about the legends, the origins of it, and I really want to find out more about the history behind Persian yoga. So can you that's kind of like my first question. Can you talk about firstly, before we go into that, what got you into Persian yoga?
Okay. Well, hello, and it's very nice to connect with you as well. And we share the same interest and passion, So I only specialize in obviously the Persian version, as I call it, the Persian version of or the Persian expression of that physical culture. But definitely its history and its origins is quite fascinating. But how I got into it myself is that my uncle practices this, and you speak to 95% of Iranians, and their connection to the Zurkhane is very similar to mine. It's an uncle that does it, and that's usually how you get introduced to it. However, when I was 8.5, my family migrated from Iran to Sweden, and so I had no connection. I lost that connection. I lost that proximity. And I rediscovered it around 2007. By that time, I was already in Australia, 2006, 2007, somewhere there, when I saw a documentary about a BBC-produced documentary called Rage Inside Iran, and where he goes and visits the Zurkhane, and that kind of like brought a flashback in my head that, hey, I know this, and I felt the need to reconnect with it, and so I traveled to Iran, and that's where how I started my journey. Like, I traveled to Iran to reconnect with this, long lost, interest that I had, because I'm very passionate about movement. I'm very passionate about like strength and the body, and understanding the body and human movement and all that. So, I had an opportunity to get insight into this old world, and I just been on that journey since. It's just a very, as I mentioned in the beginning, it's very ancient, and there's a lot to it, and there's a lot of nuances, and there's quite interesting history there. So there's a lot of things that connects me with it. Obviously being Iranian as well. So there's a very deep, passionate connection for me to that art. So yeah, that's like how I got into it, and I haven't looked back. Since 12 years ago or something, I started this practice. I stopped doing like whatever gym or thing, and more and more, I just dedicated myself more and more to this practice, and yeah, it's quite beautiful for me.
Yeah, I can imagine. Um, I think you said it. There's something beautiful about practicing a form of physical culture that has history behind it, because
Mm.
once it has history, um, it has a root. It has something that can connect you to the past, and there's a lot of respect in that. There's a lot of it becomes to me what I believe it's an art at that point, because
Yes,
yeah, I
uh,
mean,
absolutely. Look, this is something I've been thinking about a lot, and it's exactly what you say. It's more of an art is more of a way of life, It's more of it's a culture simply, It's
mhm,
a culture, something a group of people they adhere to, and it sets the norms of their quality of life and standard of living,
correct.
Culture does that, and what's very interesting about Pahlavani, we can talk about its origin and its history, etc. But its execution is very interesting, because as as I've discovered more and more with this practice, it's a very systematic approach. It's a very intentful, like it's designed in a way, and its design is also quite interesting, because its design and execution has developed over thousands of years now. So it's really constantly been very, very refined. And once you get, especially in the Zurkhane culture, and possibly I need to elaborate on this word if you're not familiar with it. The Zurkhane means the house of strength. That's where uh, Persian yoga, or Pahlavani as it's really called, that's where it's practiced. Okay, I just need to make a side note that Persian yoga is my business name, and it's my marketing term that I use to kind of reach across these cultural
Mhm,
and geographic barriers into the mind of someone who's very unfamiliar with this,
mhm,
But this art is Pahlavani, and Pahlavani is a systematic approach. It's a recipe, It's a step-by-step procedure that unlocks, and develops great strength. And with this strength, I don't mean just the ability to move an object, a heavy object. That's not what I'm talking about. This is a world's oldest, as far as we know, the world's oldest recipe for developing strength. And
mhm.
as I've said, it's been refined over thousands of years. So you will get the best chicken soup that you ordered. You know what I'm saying? This is
Absolutely.
that is the way of producing. And then you're going to see what are they trying to produce? They're trying to produce a pahlavan, and this word is important, and to elaborate on, I think, so that we understand what it is that they try, what are we trying to achieve with this approach. The
Mhm,
objective is to develop pahlavans, and if you don't mind, I'll just like keep going about this word, because Pahlavan, that's the root word for the name of the practice. The practice is called Pahlavani. There's a suffix E at the end. And that in our language, in the structure of our language, denotes that it's a nomen loci. It's like where you come from, or belonging to. So if you practice this art, you can claim that you belong to the Pahlavans. And who are these Pahlavans? They were the knights, they were the warriors, they were the warrior class of that greater Iranian society or culture, or Persianate culture, or the Persian people, the Persian people. So these guys, they gave birth to this title of a Pahlavan, and it's very similar to the English term a knight, or a paladin. And from that culture, what we have today, their physical practice or their physical culture, is what we see being ceremonially and ritually replicated in the Zulkhane in Iran today. And the Zulkhane, as I mentioned, is that temple, is that place, is that physical structure where these ceremonies and this culture is, maintained and practiced.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds, you kind of have summarized everything in these last 10 minutes. It's and I've got now 1,000 questions.
Yeah, that's the rabbit hole, yeah? Like once you start digging, there's so much there.
Well, that's the thing, and that's what I love about exploring the ancient physical culture practices, that there is so much depth in it. There's so much depth because it's, as you said, it's got a history of millennia. So that goes back to my very first question. Firstly, how old do you know Persian yoga or Pahlavani to be?
Right. The first instance in written literature that I've come across and that I know of about these people, the Pahlavans, is in the Hindu scripture of and excuse my pronunciation, Mahabharata.
Yeah.
Okay? That text there. They're referring to the stories of the Pahlavan, how they aided Indian kings in their, internal and I guess external conflicts and so on, because from what we know, these people that were referred to as the Pahlavans, or they had that kind of like very deep warrior culture, lived geographically somewhere between west of today's India, kind of like east of today's Iran, around those geographical areas, and more also north, So in those regions, because these were nomadic people and very tribal, and from what we know, like they're different, ethnically they're sometimes very different, but in those scriptures they kind of like band them all together and refer to them as the Pahlavas, right? So there is also, as far as I know and what I found, references to these same people in Persian literature, and specifically the writings of Ferdowsi, where he's referring to stories about these Pahlavans. Now, some of these stories are legends and kind of mythical in origin, but nevertheless, these are stories about these people that has been handed down. Because how it has been handed down? It's been handed down through an oral tradition, and also we have to kind of like mention, how come there are no earlier texts about this, and the Mahabharatas, as far as I know, is dated to some 400 CE or something like that, you know. Okay, but in the historical record of the Greeks, they're referring also to these warrior people, and those sources date them back to about 250 BC now. Okay, but in the Western sources, they're not really specifically referring to the Pahlavans, but they're referring to these warrior tribes that are fighting with the Persians. Yeah, so that dates them back to around 250 BC, where they're referring by name to the, for example, Suren Pahlav, and Suren Pahlav was a historical figure who was, the commander of the Persian Empire's armies at the time where they are in conflict with the Roman Empire, right? So his name is directly Pahlav, and those who are Pahlavans are belonging to his tribe, and that's where we suspect the name is coming from. Okay, and
That's interesting.
their way of life, the Pahlavas and the Pahlavans. So there is like a little bit of a conjugation differences between different languages, right? But those are the root words as we know, right? And now that character's history is quite impressive and very, very interesting. But without going into too many branches there, that's textually how we can place the name, right? But then,
Yes.
and the name and that culture and that way of life, because there was more than one person, right? There's more than one person. There's a group of people, and they all adhere to this, cultural and religious, spiritual and physical beliefs and ideas. That is the origin of the Pahlavani culture and practice, but then its expression and its history and its execution to how it's been given to us today and how it's done today. Obviously, there's a huge space of time there. Has been ever changing and ever evolving. It's a living thing. Culture is a living thing, and this
Yes.
physical culture certainly is as well. And then the Zurkhane culture, which today is the most prevalent, Zurkhane culture is the culture of where this art is being maintained and practiced. That was probably, more established around the time and after the time of the Mongol invasion in Iran. And now we're talking about, to put this in the timeline, now we're talking about 1300, 1400 CE. Okay, so around that time, and there's textual sources then that is referring to a character that is almost become mythological in his spirit, but Puriyai Vali, and this person is said to have really established the guidelines and really established like the principles of the Zurkhane culture as it's kind of like being practiced to this day. So hope that answers your question. I need to just make a side note about the scarcity of textual sources around this topic. Mainly, one reason is as I mentioned before, even the Pahlavani culture is not written. It's an oral tradition that is passed down from master to student. That's the lineage how it works. Okay, the Persian culture is not. It's an oral tradition. And these our stories are passed down as poetry from generation to generation, and that's like quite interesting because you may change the written word, but if you change the poetry, when another person is going to recite it, it's not gonna make sense, so then you can't use the words, and then you have to memorize the exact words, so that's an interesting side note about that, hopefully. But another thing that I wanted to add to this is that we have to take into consideration that the textual sources that existed were wiped out not once but 3 times. You know, there was a lot of textual sources, and the first time it was by the Greeks and the Macedonians, the second time by the Muslim Arabs, and by the third time it's already come to the Mongol invasion. And you know, a lot of you know, the first thing unfortunately they did was to burn everything. So you know, there's a lot of things lost there. However, the tradition, as I mentioned, has been passed down from an oral, you know, process, and it's been practiced in the Zulkhan. So I hope that kind of like give an insight and answer your question about that.
Yeah, I mean, that was very, very thorough. One question on that before we continue. In your oral tradition, then, is there an idea of how many millennia this whole tradition is? Are we talking 5,000, 10,000
Yeah.
years old?
Well, all right. Okay. Now this is very gray area, you know. It's not like much black and white in this, and it goes into mythology, and like someone said this, and this is what those people believe. All right. We know, this is something that we know. We know that the Pahlavans had, or the Pahlavans, that's kind of like subculture of the greater Iranian, you know, greater Iranian domain, or you know, country, if you could call it, I don't know, that they had their own specific spiritual beliefs that necessarily didn't uh, align with what was the de facto state religion. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and their beliefs, if you want to label it as such, it's much more fluid, you know, once you get into its nuances. But if you want to contextualize it and compartmentalize it, then we label it as Mithraism. That's their main spiritual belief and kind of ideological, you know, principles. Whereas at the time, you know, the state religion and the greater, from a Western point of view, the greater Iranian religion at the time was Zoroastrianism. Okay, so then we got to look at like these two different beliefs. From what we understand, you know, Mithraism as a, you know, historical activity, a religious doctrine, appears in the scene somewhere around what records tell us about 3,400 something years ago. All right. So this is now we're talking 1,500 BC, maybe 2,000
Mm-hmm.
BC, something like that. Okay. That's what like most people agree. That's like where when I say people, I'm talking about whatever literature is out there. That's like kind of like where they date this religion. However, there's cultural beliefs, and there's like people in the you know, that argue that this is much more older than that. We're talking about the time of the Vedas, the time of, you know, where the Indo-Iranian people were practically a homogeneous group. They hadn't really
Yeah.
split yet. This is now, you have to discuss if you believe in that Aryan migration theory or not, you know. But I do, and I do understand it as such that you know, the Aryans as a people were undergoing this great migration where they split at a certain point in time, and a certain group settled in the northern, you know, Indian subcontinent, and the other group continued down
Mm-hmm.
into the Iranian plateau. And when that occurred, I mean, this is very, you know, up for the debate and so on, you know. But so we can now track in history back to that point in time, because there is a coherent set of beliefs in as a religion, you could possibly say, but I don't like to use that word. It's more like an ideology or way of life, I suppose, that, we can identify as Mithraic,
Mhm.
and then also if you start to look at the what's it called, whatever is there in the archaeological record, and also about like how these people lived, in their communities. We see that these guys are very warlike, and they're very nomadic, and it's like very tribal, and they have like these practices that they're very famous for, so famous in fact that kings of different nations and empires, like we're talking Indian and the Persian, although very close, they are geographically very distinct, very far away. They would acquire these guys' services, as
Mhm.
mercenaries and etc. And it's from that culture, it's from that kind of like group of people that Pahlavani originated from. So then we can stretch it as far back as the turn of the last ice age, that some people believe that these Aryans, this stock of people, that they start appearing on the historical scene. And
Mhm.
it is because of these connections, it's because of these like threads of lines through history, that Hegel famously said that the Iranians are the first historical people. So going back to what you're saying about your studying, and that's obviously makes sense, because you're probably studying in the West, and that you will study the Western, there's the Roman and there's the Greek ones, and there's the Chinese and the Egyptians and the Indians, as you mentioned, but the the Persian people, or Iranians, is more correct to refer to them. The Iranian people have been on the scene, just as long, and they have their own expression
Mhm.
of this physical culture, or the necessity to create that perfect champion or warrior that faced all these people.
Mhm.
The second largest war in the history of humans on this planet was between the Persians and the Romans. You know, and that of course like necessitates a readily available warriors that you have access to, that you can use for your empire building or expansion or whatever it is that may be the case. So
Mhm.
I hope that gives you kind of like a bird's eye view, because this is very difficult to
Yeah,
chronologize and put like reference to. Very difficult.
it is. Now, one of the questions that I know that, well, at least that I'm really interested in, and perhaps the Stark Center, you've pretty much addressed how old this can be, and my suspicions were right that it's anywhere between 5 to 10,000 years old. Um, Now, this brings me now to the next part, and that is, it's obvious that this form of, well, I know you call it Persian yoga to attract people, but when you see the practice, it's nothing like Indian yoga. Well, that's debatable. It looks obviously more like a martial art. And now that I've heard more about the history from you, um, there's a couple of questions I've got. Firstly, I think one of the oldest martial arts that, at least that I'm aware of, is Kalari Payat from India.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, I can't help to see the amount of similarity between that practice and Palavani. So my question is it at least in your oral tradition, did your culture, um, well, is it a branch of your culture basically? Did it evolve from Pahlavani? Did Kalari
Okay.
Payat evolve from Pahlavani?
Okay. we have to take into consideration that at one point, as I mentioned, these were a homogeneous group of people
Correct.
that
Yes.
that branched. You know,
Yes.
I believe, this is my personal opinion, you know, and this is my opinion, that this culture was common to these people,
Hmm.
and it branched into two directions and evolved into different directions, because
Correct.
the
Yeah.
Pahlavani practice of today and the Pahlavans of India in the Akhara system and the I'm sorry about the pronunciation, but Karle Payat practitioners, you know, although there's similarities, the execution is very different.
Correct. It's just
So
I think I go by that because I've seen so much about Kalari Payat. I know that with Kalari Payat, the first 5 to 10 years are pure spiritual and I guess cultivation of the body. Basically, these guys do a lot of what it looks like power yoga, right? And it looks like the sequences that your culture, your cultural practice is basically with a little platform. I forgot the name of it already. Sorry,
the Shena,
the shenak, correct. So, and it's got a very similar fundamental practice as yours, right? It's only later that they actually use, of course, the shield and the saber. However, when you look at it, you guys also have that very heavy wooden shield, and you also have, instead of the saber, of course, you have the what is it called? The I forgot now. The kneel. Damn, I forgot the name.
the
The
capital,
club.
the bow or the clubs, the meal,
The club. The club.
meal,
The meal. Correct. Yeah, I was right.
yeah,
The meal. So and then of course from there it's obvious that the Indians went to China and Shaolin Kung Fu evolved from there, right? If you've studied anything from Shaolin, I know I did because I went even to China to the temples over there and studied. The earliest forms of Kung Fu are just shield and saber. After that, the sword evolved and everything else, right? But my point is that it's all got a very it all has the same root, basically. It seems to be, even in Asian martial art, the first thing you learn there is the style of yoga that the Chinese have, and that is Qigong, right?
yeah,
Which is all about the cultivation of the first Qigong, for example, you learn in China is the bone and joint Qigong, right? And when you've seen it, it's literally the same as power yoga. It's exactly the same. Right? And they all have the sun salute. That's what's so common in all these practices, which is very similar to the practice of the Shina, the very fundamental practice. So, having said all that, would you, at least in your opinion, would you say that all these cultures therefore have their roots in Persian yoga?
well, that would be too big of a statement, I think. But my point of view is more like this. My point of view is more like, you know how you can have flowers that are indigenous to a specific country, and
Mhm.
that that originated from that region, from that geographical region, and that's where it evolved, and that's where it flourished, you know and at the same time you can have a different flower that is or fruit or whatever that is very similar, but evolved and developed and originated from somewhere that is geographically very different. You know what I'm saying? My personal view is that is very possible. This reductionism to a single denominator is a very, I dare say, Western thing, you know. Whereas reality, I find in my experience, is much more fluid, and anything is very possible, So uh, I do believe certainly that they can have been complete separate roots. I'm not going to pull them back all to Persian yoga because there's like I don't know about that. However, I can say this. However, I can say this that this very ancient way of lives and these very ancient cultures, as I mentioned, had all the necessity, to enhance and strengthen the body and have a practice that really, develops health. And from a physical point of view, and we're talking about each specific culture's the core physical culture, that they grew around that. But so based on what I've been saying is that Persian expression, or not, probably that's like also not correct. The Iranian expression of that is quite old,
Mm.
and we know that there's been a connection at some point between the Indians and the Iranians, and we know
Oh,
that connection was very much revived again, after the whole Mongol havoc that happened in Asia around 1500 CE with the Persian, Safavid, and the Indian Mughal dynasties that
mhm.
really came together. They were rivals, but they were also cooperating. Like, for example, Taj Mahal was built at that time to honor a Persian princess, a Safavid princess, Persian, that came to India and married the Mughal emperor. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So there was a lot of like overlap with these cultures at that point in
Yeah,
time.
exactly.
Military strategy, architecture, building, culture, arts, all these things, women and men, all these things, crossing these cultures. So
Yes.
there was another influx at that time. And if you remember that is the time when the Zulkhana practices are becoming formalized.
Yes, correct.
You
Correct.
know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
again, like you have this overlap in these two cultures that like strengthens the bond and like injects this new, and that happened more than once. You have to remember that it happened also before that with the Arab Muslim invasion of Iran and subsequent, migration of a lot of Iranians to India
Mm-hmm.
to because they were Zoroastrians, quote unquote, they were not Muslims, so they were fleeing the persecution of the Muslims. So there was a lot of them that went to India around 600, CE as well. So you see, it
Yes.
happens in a lot of waves, and nothing is fixed. It's not one directional. It's like very fluid between them.
Mm. Yeah, I've been to India, especially to the north, and it's amazing to see the Persian influence there. I mean, they talked about it in every tour that I went, every building that I went. There was, of course, talks about all the Persian warriors that were there teaching the Indians and all the cultural exchange that occurred, basically. So
That's
I,
exactly
under-
right.
I understand a lot of that. My next question is in regards to the Romans and Greeks. I mean, again, Persian yoga looks very much like gladiator style training.
Mhm.
Would you say that in the past there would have been either cultural exchange between the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans, especially in the military, to learn their tactics, um, that there could have been influence there as well?
Well, I think the short answer is that's undeniable because if you look at Greek uh, war tactics,
Hmm.
it was as a direct response to how the Persians fought. It makes
Exactly.
total sense, right?
Yes.
So these guys are in conflict. They're like hitting it up quite often, and so they evolve countermeasures. You know,
Correct.
and we also know that the Romans, and we're talking about the two superpowers on earth at the time,
Hmm.
the Iranian Empire and the Roman Empire, that, as I said to you, have conducted the second largest war in human history. That they had so many interactions that the Roman warriors and the Roman soldiers adopted
Hmm.
the Persian warriors' belief system. That's huge. Like if you think about it, that's huge. Like imagine, I don't know. I don't even want to give like a comparative example to modern day because you can probably like extrapolate on that yourself, because if I just stick to I know, and that is that you know we know that Mithraism, as so they call it in the West, was transmitted through those interactions to the Roman warrior elites that infiltrated into the elites, that almost became, I mean, not almost, it was the state religion of the Roman Empire until they converted to Christianity,
Hmm.
you know.
Yes.
So the influence is, I believe, undeniable.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he said it. Um, wow. Okay.
And this one more thing, like one more thing that I wanted to say, it is a warrior training. It is
Yes.
a training designed to develop in the Persian mind the perfect warrior, and
Mhm.
that is also like a very interesting topic to talk about. But uh, that's how we believe that you can achieve that through this practice. And so it
Correct.
has its own, like as I said, it has its own recipe.
Yes.
But it is not a martial art. It is a martial art strength conditioning system.
Yes. It's a practice as I see it. Um, I know what you're trying to say. I've practiced martial arts for over 20 years, but I've practiced different kinds. I started off with kickboxing, which had no spiritual practice. There was no master respect practice there. There was barely any history. Then I've practiced yoga for 15, 20 years. Pure spirituality, pure development of the physical being, the mind, the body, everything, right? And then I've practiced things like Kung Fu, right? Which share both elements, right? So, yeah, and I see Persian yoga as a very similar kind of in between there. It shares, it of course builds the body, but at the same time, it feeds the soul and makes the mind intelligent. So it's a complete practice, really, to not just
Mm.
create the perfect warrior, but the perfect human. And that's how
Yeah,
I
well,
see. Yeah.
our Zarathustra, Zoroaster, who is the ancient Iranian sage, he said that if you cannot be a light unto yourself, at least you can be a warrior. That's like
Yes.
that's the least you can do. You enter into a practice, you enter into a path of self improvement and self development.
Correct. Yes.
That's what's going to lead you to the light.
Yes. I
You
agree
know.
100%.
So this
I
is
agree.
this is that this is that kind of like yeah, like this is kind of something that unfortunately been lost and becoming more lost in today's world, and that's the
Mhm.
notion of the warrior. That's the notion of the warrior. I mean, uh, you look at how ugly war is today. I mean, it's always been ugly. That's not the point. The point is that you prepared very differently. You
Yes.
prepared very differently. You prepared to meet someone in the eyes,
Correct.
not behind screen.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Um, okay, Kashi, um, we've talked about the origins and a lot about the history, but I think my time is now running up. um, I think in the next, I would like to do another one of these calls with you because I there's so much to talk about, and I think in
Mm.
the next one, if we can do another one soon, um, I would now like to go into the depth of the practice and how it you can probably explain all of that really clearly, all the levels that are involved in this kind of practice. And I'm very interested in hearing about that in our next interview, if that's okay with you.
Of course, thank you so much. And I love to share this, so I'm happy to have had the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. I'm just going to stop recording for a second.
No problem.
So that was Kashi from Persian Yoga in Sydney, and I found Kashi a very intelligent individual, passionate about his art and spreading the word of Pahlavani. I had so many more questions to ask, but will most likely have to invite him for another interview in the very near future. As Kashi puts it, Pahlavani is an art, an ancient physical culture that is systematically designed and refined over the last, thousands of years in what is called the Zurkhaneh, or the House of Strength. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The systematic art of Pahlavani develops Pahlavans, fighters that belong to the warrior class of the ancient Persian, like Knights of England kind of thing. It's quite similar to that kind of the Knights of England kind of status. The name originates from the name of the commander of the Persian army, Sudan Pahlav, who battled the Roman Empire back in 250 BC. At least that's what I learned from Kashi. Similar to other martial arts, the history of Pahlavani is passed on by oral tradition through poetry. From what I gathered, Persian yoga may have had influence or influenced other arts, such as those practiced in ancient Greece and Rome, and those of Asia and India. I have found it very similar to Kalari Payat of southern India, which is similar in that it has a yogic-like practice that focuses on the development of the body and soul and movements that can be applied in combat. In fact, whilst traveling in India 2 decades ago, I learned that Persians helped the Indians in many of their battles over the centuries, so there was obvious exchange of military skills. It may even be that Pahlavani influenced Chinese Kung Fu and other martial arts which evolved through time. In my next video interview with Kashi will go into depth into the practice of Pahlavani, so stay tuned for this upcoming video. So I do hope you have enjoyed this interview video with Kashi Azad on the oldest style of physical culture in the world, Pahlavani. If you have enjoyed the video, please give the video a like, subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and please leave me your comments and click the bell button to be notified of future videos. If you wish to find out more about Persian yoga, simply get in touch with Kashi via his Instagram or visit www.persianyoga.com. That's it from me. This is the Golden Era Bookworm saying bye for now. Now, if you're interested in learning more about Vince Gironda's approach to bodybuilding, his principles, and all these tips of wisdom that he has, I mean, there's so much stuff that probably hasn't been proven by science, and it will take science to prove or disprove Vince. But to be honest, these 3 books, I believe, which I call the Classic Physique Bundle, are the best books that Vince ever came out with. And they, of course, are the Wild Physique, the Master Series, and the Pro Series. Have a look at it this way. The Wild Physique, I believe, is like the ABCs of Vince Gironda's principles to bodybuilding. He teaches you the exercises and his principles. But how do you put them together? Well, the Master Series is a 14-month program of using all of these principles, all of the diets that Vince came out with, all of the exercises. And believe me, it's a brilliant program. Many people have used it. I know personally a lot of bodybuilders that have actually used it and made fantastic results with it. And of course, the Pro Series was a book that he came out with later on, specially targeted for getting into competition. It's just these 3 books, as I call it, the Classic Physique Bundle, Vince's best work, and available, of course, at www.goldenerabookworm.com. Now, the Pro Series of Bodybuilding, which was targeted for professional bodybuilders, contains 6 programs, each of which go for 2 months each. So it's a whole year, again, in preparation for competition. Online training is now available, including my new program, Novice to Classic, a program geared towards beginners and novices looking at developing a classic physique, as well as Classic Cut, geared at those who wish to lose weight and gain muscle fast. Details available at www.goldenerabookworm.com. Need a bodybuilding poster for your gym or office? Then check out Iron Man Magazine archive.smugmug.com for the highest quality posters on the planet. Scroll through the galleries of all the legends, including greats such as Arnold, Frank Zane, Sergio Oliva, Serge Nubret, Tom Platz, and Larry Scott, and much, much more, and select your poster now. To support your favorite YouTube channel, please visit teespring.com/store/Golden Era Bookworm for merchandise including t-shirts, hoodies, face masks, phone cases, and much, much more. Once again at teespring.com/store/Golden Era Bookworm. Become a patron at www.patreon.com/Golden Era Bookworm for hard to find books, scans of rare photos, and articles on the Golden Era of bodybuilding.
I don't think that Bill Phillips looked at it as, I want to compete against them. I want to destroy them.
If they pass legislation basically making any type of food supplement a prescription item, that would be the end, the death of the entire food supplement industry.
Take your vitamin pill now.
In the 1960s, the sports supplement industry was barely emerging.
I think the reason why Joe Weider was so successful was he had Arnold on his side.
He wasn't selling supplements. He was in the dream business.
Joe Weider was a marketing genius.
People would say the promotions or the endorsements back then were cheesy. To me, it wasn't. I loved it.
Fitness was taking off. You know, fitness became cool. You had a lot of readers that wanted to be like the stars that they idolized.
Bill's strength is his marketing savvy. He's a marketing genius.
Got it. It's only vitamin.
The right of American citizens to have free access to dietary supplements of their choice.
Consult your physician. You might as well consult the next guy you meet on the street. They don't know a damn thing about vitamins and nutrition.
The dietary supplement industry became the #2 most regulated industry. Nuclear, dietary supplements, pharmaceutical. We're more regulated than drugs.
They come in and you need to allow the FDA. They have jurisdiction.
The enforcement is kind of the questionable side of it, and how do they really get a handle on this monster?
A lot of people tell me that the dietary supplement industry is completely unregulated. It's the wild, wild west out there. It's a free-for-all. That could not be further from the truth.
A dietary supplement is not allowed to have a side effect. I always say the pharmaceutical has to have a minimum of 100 side effects in order for it to be a drug.
And now, it's a $40 billion industry and growing.
That's the really interesting thing, is the cast of characters from the 80s, when it was kind of iffy, to now when it's a lot more legitimate.
They made it sound cutting edge, revolutionary, and different, and I want that. That's cool.
We are in this industry to improve our health. It's not just a vanity project here. We're working on our lifeline. We eat a certain way to improve our health. We train a certain way to improve our health. Supplements are just that. They supplement your work, your graft, your nutrition.
They demonize dietary supplements, but they say all you need is real food. Well, what's a real food?
They pump you up and get you hard, stronger, faster, bigger.
Doc, I want to take this weight gain. I want to take this pre-workout. No way. That stuff, we don't know what's in that. It could be, no way. I'm not going to give you, it's going to kill the industry, bottom line.
So I must have drank so much protein powder from age 15 to 18 that my head was going to explode.
I believed in metrics so much that I would probably punch somebody in the face if they tried to take it away from me.